I always thought family was supposed to lift you up, not push you down. But my brother, Jason, never missed a chance to remind me how unrealistic my dreams were. Yesterday, at Dad's study, he laughed so loud I could feel the sting of every word. "Miller, stick to what you know. Ambition won't put food on the table," he said, grinning like he already won life's lottery. Before I tell you how I got my revenge, hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. I forced a smile, my hands tight around my notebook. They didn't know I had been working on a plan, quietly. Every late night, every rejected idea, every setback, it was all sharpening me. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I let the laughter wash over me like a storm, knowing storms pass. Deep down, I felt the fire of determination grow. One day, I would show him that ambition wasn't foolishness. One day, I would prove him wrong. And when that day came, the laughter wouldn't be mine. It would be his. After yesterday's humiliation, I couldn't sleep. Every mocking laugh of Jason's replayed in my mind. But instead of anger, a strange calm took over me. Anger is loud, but patience is quiet, and quiet wins wars. I pulled out my laptop and started jotting down ideas, tiny steps I could take that no one would notice. I began mapping his weaknesses, his arrogance, his dependence on others, the way he bragged about connections he barely used. I remembered every time he dismissed me, every sarcastic comment, and every funny suggestion he made about my failures. They were seeds. Seeds I could turn into tools. I also started reconnecting with old contacts, people Jason never thought I'd remember. I asked small questions, tested their loyalty, gauged what they valued. Every piece of information was a brick for the wall I would build around him. By dawn, I had a plan in my mind, a quiet, invisible strategy. No shouting, no fights, just patience. The kind of patience that waits until the right moment, then strikes with a force no laughter can resist. I watched Jason from a distance the next day, pretending to be busy with my own failures. He strutted through the office, confident, mocking, unaware that his arrogance was about to be his undoing. The first move had to be subtle, invisible. That's how silent revenge works, it hides in plain sight. I started with small disruptions. Emails subtly redirected, calls delayed, files misplaced, just enough to slow him down. Each tiny misstep looked accidental, harmless, until patterns emerged. Jason's frustration began showing, he snapped at assistants, blamed clients, questioned his own decisions. Perfect. Love revenge stories? Subscribe now. We drop new ones every day, raw, emotional, and full of justice. Don't miss the next chapter. Meanwhile, I nurtured allies who had quietly grown tired of his arrogance. I didn't need their loyalty yet, just awareness, tiny shifts of influence. I shared smiles, asked casual questions, and dropped hints that made them think I was struggling, while secretly gathering support. Every laugh he had at me fueled my focus. Every sneer sharpened my strategy. Revenge isn't a sprint, it's a chess game, and my first move was already setting him up for checkmate. He thought he was untouchable, but every empire has a weak foundation, and I intended to shake his until it crumbled. Jason started noticing the tiny things. He blamed bad luck. A client called with a wrong file, a meeting room double-booked, a presentation missing a slide. He stared at the screen, jaw clenched, muttering about incompetence. His confidence wavered like a glass with a crack. I watched him keep his mask of control. He tried to act normal, cracking jokes, but his eyes were different. He asked the office manager to check schedules twice. He demanded status updates. He accused an assistant of carelessness. The team tensed. He was used to being the loudest voice, but now he spoke faster, as if speed could cover the gap. When a big investor canceled a lunch, Jason lost his temper. He snapped at the receptionist, slammed a report on a desk, and walked out. People exchanged looks. That was the moment I wanted. Panic spreads faster than confidence. I remained calm. I kept my schedule steady, smiled, and offered quiet help when needed. Small kindnesses build trust. My plan was working. The cracks in his armor grew. People started to wonder if maybe he was not as sharp as he claimed. Every doubt was a tiny win. By midweek, whispers began to float through the office. People talked in hushed tones, careful not to let Jason hear. A missed email here, a forgotten file there. Suddenly, everyone seemed nervous. I kept my distance, observing silently, my smile polite, my hands clean. Jason's frustration grew. He barked at his team, demanding explanations. Why wasn't this done? He shouted at an intern. Heads lowered, fingers fidgeted, and the energy in the office shifted. Confidence left him like water through a sieve. The more he tried to regain control, the more his mistakes seemed to multiply. I made small, careful errors myself, just enough to redirect attention subtly. Nothing traceable to me. A misfiled document here, a delayed message there. Jason noticed, of course, but couldn't pin blame. Every slip became a seed of doubt. By Friday, the mood had shifted. Even his closest allies hesitated before answering his questions. He was no longer the unshakable brother I had once envied. He was faltering, vulnerable. And as his cracks widened, I felt the thrill of quiet revenge, knowing the storm I'd begun was only just forming. I watched the office atmosphere change like a tide. People whispered and checked their phones more often. Jason tried to act fierce, but his voice sounded thin. I knew I needed to push carefully now. Small things had done their work. It was time to tighten the plan. I started arranging meetings with clients I knew Jason wanted. I asked questions that made them think about long-term risk, and I mentioned small problems he had missed. I did it gently, like a concerned friend. The clients began to ask for extra reports and proof. Jason scrambled to answer. His answers came late and lacked detail. At the same time, I gave the team just enough help to seem useful but not in charge. I praised good work in public and quietly corrected tiny errors in private. People noticed. Trust began to shift in small degrees. Outside the office, I met an old mentor. He listened to my story and offered a few contacts. His belief in me felt like fuel. I was careful, patient, and steady. Each move built on the last. The setup was deeper now, and the next step would need timing. By now, the tension in the office was thick enough to cut. Jason's usual confidence was cracking. Meetings I had subtly influenced were beginning to reveal his mistakes. Clients emailed with questions he couldn't answer quickly, and his team grew anxious under his sudden defensiveness. I stayed calm, observing each reaction, learning how far I could push. I started sharing helpful advice with him in front of others, always phrased politely. He tried to keep up, but the pressure made him snap at small errors. People noticed, whispered behind closed doors, and I kept my composure. Every minor failure built a story in their minds. Jason was not as invincible as he appeared. Meanwhile, I reached out privately to key colleagues who felt undervalued. I encouraged them to take small steps that highlighted their skills and his mistakes without directly attacking him. They began to feel empowered, and the balance subtly shifted. At night, I reviewed all interactions. Each misstep Jason made was a piece in the puzzle. The cracks were showing, and soon the walls he built around himself would crumble. I was ready. It started with a single email, harmless in appearance, but carefully crafted. I had discovered a minor discrepancy in one of Jason's reports and subtly brought it to the attention of our clients. Nothing overtly damaging, just enough to plant doubt. The response came slower than I expected, a polite question that hinted at concern. Jason panicked when he saw it, trying to explain himself to clients and colleagues alike. His usual smooth confidence was gone. He fumbled over words, contradicted himself, and I stayed silent, letting the chain reaction unfold. Meanwhile, I began connecting with clients on my own, asking subtle questions that highlighted areas Jason had overlooked. They didn't realize I was steering them, not criticizing him. The seeds of doubt grew. By the end of the day, a senior partner cornered Jason privately, mentioning the minor issues in a concerned tone. Jason returned to his office pale and jittery, realizing the first domino had fallen. The office air was thick with whispers, and I smiled quietly. The game had begun. I spent the morning watching Jason struggle. He tried to regain control, sending more emails, calling clients, and even organizing meetings, but his usual sharpness was dulled. Every misstep, every hesitated word, made him look smaller in the eyes of the office. I stayed in the background, appearing busy, but absorbing every detail. I noticed patterns in his behavior, how he panicked when confronted with deadlines, how he overcompensated with unnecessary reassurances, how easily he flustered when someone questioned his authority. These small cracks were gold for me. During lunch, I met a few clients under the guise of casual conversation. I asked questions that made them think, subtly casting doubt on Jason's recent decisions. I didn't accuse, I simply highlighted inconsistencies, and their curiosity grew. By late afternoon, whispers filled the office. Jason's panic was palpable, his usually composed demeanor was gone. I sipped my coffee calmly, enjoying the quiet satisfaction. The first domino had fallen yesterday, but now the next few were wobbling, and I was ready to push them. I knew it was time to act. Weeks of observation, patience, and subtle manipulation had built the perfect moment. Jason had grown careless, assuming no one noticed his mistakes. I smiled quietly, he was blind to the storm I was about to unleash. That morning, I sent an email to a key client, phrased carefully to highlight an error Jason had made without directly blaming him. It read like concern, a simple clarification, but it planted doubt. Within hours, the client replied, questioning some of Jason's recent strategies. Back at the office, Jason's phone started buzzing incessantly. His confident tone faltered with each call, his usual charm replaced by panic. I watched him stumble, all while appearing engrossed in my own work. By afternoon, the office buzzed with rumors. I stayed calm, listening, absorbing, learning. Every whispered question, every hesitant glance toward Jason, fueled my satisfaction. The first strike was subtle, almost invisible, but its impact was undeniable. The path I'd been quietly preparing was now alive, moving forward, and Jason had no idea I was in full control. I noticed how Jason's confidence was cracking, his composure slipping under pressure. Everyone around him was starting to see cracks he thought he had hidden. I stayed in the background, silent, observing every reaction. My advantage grew with each passing moment. During lunch, I casually mentioned to another colleague a small concern about Jason's recent work. I phrased it so that it seemed innocent, but curiosity spread like wildfire. Soon, whispers reached management, and I saw doubt creeping into their eyes. I didn't push, I only let the seed grow. Later, I reviewed documents Jason had carelessly left on his desk. Small errors jumped out, tiny mistakes that could be used to my benefit. I copied a few discreetly, knowing the right time to reveal them would be devastating. By the evening, Jason's facade of control was crumbling. People were hesitating, questioning, and looking at him differently. I smiled quietly, knowing my patient, silent manipulation was working perfectly. The storm was building, and I was the calm force orchestrating it from the shadows. I knew I could not pull this off alone. The office had people tired of Jason's swagger. I began to reach out in small, honest ways. I helped an intern finish a report and gave clear praise. I sat with a quiet analyst and asked about her goals. I showed respect to the receptionist whose ideas Jason ignored. These small acts built quiet trust. One by one, people noticed me differently. They came to me with problems Jason rushed through. They asked for my opinion. I listened and offered honest help. No flattery. No show. Just steady help. They began to rely on me and to share small facts about projects and schedules. This information was gold. At the same time, I used what I learned wisely. I avoided blame and instead fixed issues so others could see results. When a client asked for a correction, I offered the solution. The client thanked me openly. My reputation grew like a plant fed slowly. Meanwhile, Jason's support faded. Allies in plain sight had become my strongest tool. The quiet network was ready. Soon, the right moment would come, and we would not hesitate together. Jason had grown careless. His arrogance was a shield, but shields crack under pressure. I had collected enough small insights from my allies, each detail like a tiny lever ready to pry open his empire. I didn't strike yet, patience was part of the plan. Timing mattered more than haste. It started with a single client meeting. Jason fumbled numbers he had claimed to know by heart. I quietly stepped in, offering a correction and a clearer projection. The client nodded, impressed, and made a mental note. Jason's smirk faltered. Behind me, colleagues exchanged looks, their confidence in him quietly shifting toward me. A rumor, planted subtly, began to circulate about Jason's oversight on an important project. Nothing overt, just whispers and questions, enough to make senior staff pause. I continued my careful work, never attacking, only shining light on truths already there. The first crack appeared. Jason didn't see it yet, but the foundation beneath him had started to tremble. I smiled quietly, knowing bigger moves were coming. The office felt different. The energy had changed, though nothing had exploded yet. People spoke in softer tones around Jason, their respect wavering like leaves in a mild wind. I stayed calm, observing, knowing that silent influence was often more powerful than loud confrontation. I began volunteering for key projects, offering solutions subtly that made me look competent without seeming opportunistic. Colleagues started coming to me for advice. Jason noticed, but he shrugged it off, assuming it was temporary. Little did he know, each time someone sought my input, their trust in him quietly eroded. I also nudged a few loyal contacts to double-check numbers and reports, making sure any minor oversight from Jason was noticed, but never blamed on me. It was poetic, the cracks weren't my doing, they were his own mistakes, now visible to everyone. By the end of the week, whispers had transformed into hushed discussions. A silent shift was underway. The throne Jason had taken for granted was beginning to feel less secure, and I hadn't even lifted a finger openly. Patience, I reminded myself, was a weapon. I waited for the perfect moment. Months of planning, watching, and collecting information had brought me here. Jason's arrogance blinded him, he never suspected that I had quietly built my own network of allies inside the company. It began with a small error in a report he submitted to the board. I didn't create it, I merely pointed out a detail that he had overlooked, framed carefully so it seemed accidental. The board noticed, murmurs spread, and Jason's confidence began to crack. Meanwhile, I had cultivated trust with the right colleagues. My suggestions started gaining traction. People began valuing my judgment more than Jason's. He grew defensive, snapping at minor questions, losing composure where I stayed calm and collected. That week, a pivotal client called me directly to discuss solutions, bypassing Jason entirely. It was the first true strike in my silent campaign. Small, calculated, and devastating. By the weekend, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years, justice was no longer a dream. It was unfolding, step by step, and Jason had no idea. The office atmosphere had shifted. Whispers followed Jason wherever he went, subtle but unmistakable. My reputation grew with each passing day, my ideas accepted without question while his were scrutinized. I watched him struggle, his frustration visible in every forced smile and tense word. I continued my quiet campaign. Emails carefully crafted, reminders sent strategically, and subtle hints dropped during meetings. Colleagues began relying on me, seeking my advice on matters Jason had once controlled. Each small victory built momentum, strengthening my position. Jason's mistakes became more frequent. He snapped at a junior staff member during a meeting, and the entire room felt the tension. I remained calm, letting his temper speak for him. The board took notice. By the end of the week, a major client scheduled a private call with me instead of Jason. I felt the thrill of control, knowing the tides had turned. The laughter that had once humiliated me now fueled my resolve. The game was no longer even, Jason was already losing. The office atmosphere had shifted. Whispers followed Jason wherever he went, subtle but unmistakable. My reputation grew with each passing day. My ideas were accepted without question while his were scrutinized. I watched him struggle, his frustration visible in every forced smile and tense word. Each mistake, each misstep, made him weaker. I continued my quiet campaign. Emails carefully crafted, reminders sent strategically, subtle hints dropped during meetings. Colleagues began relying on me, seeking my advice on matters Jason had once controlled. Each small victory built momentum, strengthening my position. My confidence grew, the thrill of silent revenge fueling me. Jason's errors became more frequent. He snapped at a junior staff member during a meeting. The tension in the room was palpable. I remained calm, letting his temper speak for him. The board noticed. By week's end, a major client scheduled a private call with me instead of Jason. I felt the thrill of control, knowing the tides had turned. The laughter that had once humiliated me now fueled my resolve. The game was no longer even. Jason was already losing, and I had all the power. Jason's arrogance blinded him. He assumed I would continue quietly, never challenging his authority. That mistake would cost him everything. I had spent months gathering information, emails, contracts, financial discrepancies, all tucked carefully in a hidden folder on my personal drive. Every detail was a puzzle piece, and soon, the picture would be complete. Late at night, I reviewed the evidence. Each document revealed mistakes Jason had thought were buried, miscalculations he believed were hidden. My plan was no longer theoretical, it was executable. The knowledge gave me a thrill, a power I had never felt before. I could strike subtly, ensuring he never knew the full extent of my control until it was too late. During the day, I continued my facade of compliance. I smiled, took notes, and offered support, all while Jason's decisions crumbled under the weight of his own oversight. Colleagues whispered questions to me, unaware of how much I already knew. Soon, the final act would begin. The board would see his failures, clients would question his competence, and Jason's empire would slowly unravel. And when it did, I would be standing tall, the architect of his downfall. Silence had never tasted so sweet. The morning sunlight hit the office windows, but Jason never noticed it. His focus was on trivial matters, believing he was untouchable. Meanwhile, I quietly sent the first wave of subtle hints to the board. A misplaced report, a carefully phrased email, a missing clause in a contract, each small detail planted seeds of doubt. I smiled behind my calm exterior, knowing the cracks were forming exactly where I wanted. By midday, whispers began. Board members exchanged confused glances over coffee, murmurs about oversight and errors that should have been impossible for someone of Jason's experience. I feigned concern, subtly redirecting questions and pretending to double-check reports. Jason, oblivious, praised his own efficiency, not realizing his credibility was slipping. In the break room, colleagues began to ask questions they normally wouldn't. My strategy was unfolding perfectly. Each step was measured, each action calculated. I had no intention of rushing, patience was my ally. By evening, the first real challenge came. A client called, frustrated by a repeated oversight. I listened calmly, offered a solution, and quietly documented the incident. Jason remained unaware, but the dominoes were set. Tomorrow, the real pressure would begin, and I would be ready. Jason walked into the office with his usual arrogance, unaware that the walls around him were already closing in. Subtle doubts had turned into questions, and questions were starting to sound like complaints. By now, whispers were louder, and the board was restless. I watched quietly from my desk, pretending to focus on paperwork, while keeping an eye on the chaos I had orchestrated. A critical client called again, this time demanding answers about a missed deadline. Jason fumbled, trying to explain, but his words sounded hollow. I calmly offered a solution, documenting everything meticulously. Every misstep he made was a brick in the wall I was building around him. At the afternoon meeting, the board subtly questioned Jason's judgment, citing minor errors I had carefully highlighted. He tried to defend himself, but his confidence was cracking. I stayed silent, letting the tension build, knowing that silence was more powerful than any accusation I could make. By the end of the day, Jason's facade was unraveling. He left the office tense, uncertain, and exposed. I leaned back in my chair, a small smile forming. The dominoes were falling, and soon, very soon, he would have nowhere to hide. The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. Jason's overconfidence was his weakness, and I had carefully nudged every piece into place. Today, everything would come together, and the empire he had taken for granted would start to crumble. I arrived early at the office, checking the last emails and financial reports one more time. Every discrepancy, every overlooked contract, every missed deadline had been recorded, highlighted, and backed up. This wasn't revenge in haste, it was strategy in motion. When Jason strutted in, oblivious, I handed a printed summary to the board. The evidence was undeniable: mismanaged funds, broken promises, and key client complaints he couldn't explain away. I stayed calm, letting my silence speak louder than words. The board exchanged glances, their trust in Jason visibly shaken. He tried to interject, to defend himself, but every argument fell flat. The web I had spun was too tight, every escape route blocked. By mid-afternoon, Jason was cornered. The board demanded accountability, and he had no allies left. I watched as his confidence drained, replaced by panic and disbelief. Today, the tables had turned, and I knew one thing with certainty: I would be the last one laughing. By morning, the news had spread through the office like wildfire. Jason's errors and mismanagement weren't just embarrassing, they were catastrophic. Emails leaked, contracts questioned, clients reconsidering partnerships. The empire he had built on arrogance and deceit was collapsing around him. I walked past his office, calm and collected, while his phone rang non-stop. Every ring reminded him of the mistakes he had ignored, the trust he had broken, and the silent work I had done while he slept. My patience had paid off. The board called an emergency meeting. Jason entered, trying to mask fear with false bravado. But the room's energy had shifted. Allies avoided eye contact, colleagues whispered and nodded toward me. He realized, too late, that I wasn't just an opponent, I was a force he had underestimated for far too long. One by one, clients confirmed their departures, partners questioned their commitments, and his reputation spiraled downward. I stayed silent, letting the weight of evidence and betrayal crush him. As he finally slumped into defeat, I allowed a small, quiet smile. Victory didn't need shouting, the silence of justice was far louder. Jason had lost, and I had won, completely and undeniably. The office felt different the next day, lighter, charged with possibilities. With Jason's influence gone, I had the chance to reshape everything, not just for revenge, but for long-term success. I walked through the halls, acknowledging my team, grateful for their patience and loyalty. They had stayed, quietly supporting me while chaos unfolded. I called a meeting with the remaining executives. No grand speeches, just clear, focused plans. Every project reviewed, every client account secured, every weak link addressed. I had learned from Jason's arrogance, and now, I used that knowledge to strengthen the foundation he had nearly destroyed. Outside, news outlets began reporting the downfall of a once mighty executive, highlighting my strategy, restraint, and vision. I stayed out of the spotlight, letting my work speak. Quiet revenge had transitioned into visible competence, the perfect combination. Even personally, I reflected on what I had endured, the mockery, betrayal, and doubt. And how it had fueled my transformation. I realized my ambition had not only survived but grown sharper. By nightfall, I sat at my desk, looking over the projects I had reclaimed. A sense of calm settled in. Victory wasn't just about taking down Jason, it was about building something stronger from the ruins he had left behind. The call came unexpectedly. Jason's voice was tense, almost pleading. He had lost everything, clients, credibility, and the trust he had once taken for granted. I listened quietly, letting the silence stretch. His arrogance had been his downfall, and now he wanted answers, perhaps even forgiveness. I didn't rush. Instead, I outlined what had happened, every strategic move, every quiet maneuver, every client I had secured after he doubted me. Each word reminded him that the empire he thought he controlled had slipped through his fingers, piece by piece. I underestimated you, he admitted, voice heavy with regret. I smiled faintly, but not out of joy, out of recognition. Revenge had never been about cruelty, it had been about proving that diligence, patience, and intelligence always outweigh arrogance. I told him he could learn from this or continue to watch from the sidelines. After the call, I felt a strange sense of closure. The tension that had followed me for months lifted. My brother's laughter, once a source of pain, had become the echo of my triumph. I had not just survived his scorn, I had transformed it into power. The empire was mine, built stronger and wiser, ready for the future I always envisioned. With Jason's empire crumbled, the next step was unexpected, rebuilding trust. Clients, employees, and allies had been wary of him for years, and I needed to show them that loyalty and integrity still mattered. My focus shifted from revenge to growth, proving that patience and smart decisions created stability. I held meetings with key partners, listening more than I spoke. Their doubts had been valid, but now I demonstrated a vision built on transparency and consistency. Every decision reflected lessons learned from past betrayals, and slowly, the respect I had earned returned. Even Miller, my closest friend and advisor, noticed the change. "You've done more than beat him," he said. "You've shown everyone what real leadership looks like." The satisfaction wasn't in seeing Jason fall, it was in knowing I had risen above petty grudges. My success no longer depended on proving a point, it came from skill, strategy, and unwavering patience. At night, when the city lights reflected off the office windows, I allowed myself a quiet smile. The laughter that once haunted me had transformed into triumph, and a new era of my life had begun, one defined not by scorn, but by vision, power, and respect. The morning sun hit the skyline, golden and sharp, as I walked into the office one last time as the architect of my own destiny. Everything Jason had tried to destroy was now rebuilt stronger, under my name, my vision, and my hands. The empire wasn't just recovered, it was thriving, unshakable. News outlets covered the story quietly at first, then with fascination. The man everyone had dismissed had outsmarted his brother, reclaimed what was his, and turned betrayal into triumph. Emails from former clients poured in, expressing loyalty and renewed trust. Investors were impressed, competitors wary. The world had noticed, and the feeling was intoxicating. Yet, the sweetest part wasn't the wealth or influence, it was the peace. I didn't need to gloat or seek vengeance anymore. Jason's fall was complete, but my rise was elegant, measured, and unstoppable. That evening, I leaned back in my chair, looking out over the city lights. A chuckle escaped me, not out of anger, but sheer satisfaction. Miller Roy had laughed last, yes, but more importantly, he had laughed wisely, patiently, and without regret. The final chapter of betrayal had closed, and a new story of triumph had begun. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more powerful narratives, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what part hit you the hardest. Thanks for watching.